This is Disclosure Radio, and I need you to stop whatever you are doing at this moment. I mean, unless you are driving on the freeway, don't stop that. But if you're doing anything else, stop for a moment. Just lean in a little bit closer to the radio and listen. My name is Sean. I'm the host of this show, and what I want to do right now is ask you some questions. Let me ask you this. Have you ever come to the point in your life where you're not even sure it's worth pursuing anything? You've just lost interest in life. Do you find yourself not wanting to get out of bed in the morning and face the world because it's easier just not to deal with it? Is it easier to close everybody out and ignore the people you know because you don't think or you don't believe they could possibly understand the pain that you are suffering? Maybe you're not even sure you understand the pain that you're suffering. Do you find that you have trouble concentrating when that never used to be a problem? Do you struggle to make decisions when that used to be the easiest thing in the world? Do you even find the simplest tasks exhausting or pointless or overwhelming? Do you look at what you need to do and just not do any of it because it's too much? Are you tired? And I don't mean sleepy, but actually tired, physically wiped out. Do you feel worthless, like your life doesn't have purpose, that maybe your existence doesn't actually mean anything to anybody, that there's no point to you being here on this planet? Do you feel like maybe your life is going off the rails and you don't know how to fix it? Or maybe you have this deep inner sadness that you cannot explain to other people, and you're not sure life will ever be good again. Do you maybe lay awake at night and you can't sleep and you're not sure why? There's no real reason you're not sleeping, but then when morning comes, you can't get out of bed. Maybe you sleep half the day because that's just easier than dealing with life. Maybe you find yourself eating compulsively. You don't know why, or you're losing interest in things like relationships or maybe even sexual activity. Then hear me out. You might be suffering from depression. Now, that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and I'm not always sure that some people understand what depression is. I'm not always sure I understand what depression is and what it isn't because there's an awful lot of information out there. You can go on the internet and try and self-diagnose your problems, and that's a scary place to get information. You'll come away convinced that there's something wrong that isn't, or maybe convinced that nothing is wrong when something is. It's not the best place to go for information. So today, here's what we've done on Disclosure. I've invited Jennifer Jill Schwerzer to join us again. We've always been delighted when she's on the program. And if you're new to Jennifer, she's the head cheese. She's the chief cook and bottle washer at Abide Counseling in Florida. And if you've heard Jennifer before, you know that this hour is going to be well worth your time. So here's what I need you to do. I need you to drop what you're doing. I mean, unless you're carrying a baby, don't drop the baby, but drop whatever else it is that you're doing. Get comfortable and get ready to learn about one of America's most common ailments. Jennifer, I understand you're waiting on the phone, that you're already here. Jennifer, are you there?
Yeah, I'm actually really depressed because of that introduction. It was just, you really took us there, Sean.
Is the show off today? Is it off?
Because, I feel it.
Oh, was that you? Hey,
no, I'm like a case in point here.
Well, I can't say.
Exhibit A, I'm bummed.
Well, I can't say I've never fallen into these categories. I've had days, I've had weeks, seasons where getting out of bed in the morning seems pointless. I know that I've...
Well, then you were diagnosable.
Oh, really?
Seriously.
Wow.
2 weeks. It's 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
If you're totally unmotivated, and a total apathy and or low mood, very low mood for 2 weeks, that's at least the beginning of a diagnosis for depression.
Well, I didn't actually clock it, so I don't know if it was 2 weeks. But I've been there. I've been there where life was overwhelming and I didn't want to do life anymore. I'm just being honest. Yeah.
Me too.
Hey, I'm glad you've come to the show, that you've agreed to come slumming and spend a few minutes with the likes of me. Because, after that description, I've got issues, right?
No, you've depressed me.
I know.
You have to pay for my counseling, my therapy.
You've got a show on the 3ABN network, and you've been trying to get me to come on that show so that you and your friends can diagnose me.
Can descend upon you.
Yeah, can figure out what makes me tick. And
it's called A Multitude of Counselors, and we figured you'd be the perfect client for that show because you'd have 4 or 5 people working on you. I think you're too much for just any one person, You know
what I'm afraid of? I'm going to end up in a textbook. That's what's going to happen. I'm going to be like that guy who got rebar through his head. I can't remember his name. He's a famous case study, though. And
Phineas Gage.
Phineas Gage, that's right. He got the steel thing through his head, and I can't remember why it disconnected something.
Rod. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
His cerebral cortex. Yeah, his frontal lobe.
See, I don't have an excuse though. I have not had a rod through my head. Hey,
you haven't. It's something else. We haven't figured it out yet. We're working.
No. I think my mother-in-law's got a diagnosis, though. I've heard one. So.
Okay. Do you care to? This is
disclosure. No. This is family.
So-called disclosure.
Yeah, no. This is family radio, though. I can't talk about that. Hey, listen. Here's what we do need to point out. I need to point something out as we get started. And it's just to say this, folks. This show is not a medical clinic, and this show is not an official psychiatrist couch. Jennifer brings a world of expertise and learning to the table. I know we're all going to be learning something, but this show, just so that we say it up front, it's not meant to replace your family doctor or the need to consult a medical professional. So please, don't make a lot of sudden life changes without talking to your family physician. That's a fair statement, Jennifer? I think that's a fair statement.
Yes, very fair. Very good disclaimer.
Yeah. I always want people to, some people just try and diagnose themselves all the time, and it's especially when it comes to something like depression. I'm not sure you're in the right frame of mind to figure yourself out. You're not seeing straight, and your gauges aren't right. But hey, listen, we talk about depression a lot. Everybody talks about depression. This person's depressed. That I hear about it in talk shows, magazine articles. It's on the internet. Little videos on YouTube. How big of a problem is depression? How prevalent is it? Because we hear a lot about it.
Well, surprisingly, anxiety is actually more commonly diagnosed than depression, but anxiety is really a whole cluster of disorders.
Okay.
Of like 6 or 7 different kinds of anxiety, whereas mood disorders are depression, bipolar, and what's called persistent depressive disorder, major depressive disorder, and persistent depressive disorder. Anyway, those are considered forms of depression.
Okay.
And from what I can gather, it's about 9% lifetime prevalence rate in the U.S.
So by lifetime prevalence, that means 9% of the population at some point would be diagnosably depressed.
At some point in their lifetime will be diagnosed depressed, not just diagnosably depressed, but diagnosed depressed.
So that doesn't count the people that are slipping through the cracks. Wow.
That aren't even seeing a clinician and aren't getting diagnosed. So it could be much, much higher than that.
So really, if you look around, you work in an office with 100 people, 9 of those people are going to be diagnosed with depression in their lifetime.
Roughly, yeah.
That's a lot.
It's one of a couple of different kinds of depression, not all major depressive disorder, but one of a couple different kinds. There's milder forms. It's a personal opinion here. It's probably sort of like a spectrum situation, but for the sake of diagnosis, sometimes we have to have discrete categories. We have to make sense out of this kind of stuff, so we'll break it up into categories, but I personally view it as more of a spectrum kind of thing.
Okay, so
or people can have a mild case and people can have a severe case.
Sure. So the 9% applies to everything on that spectrum then?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what is it though? Yeah. I mean, what's the difference between depression and just having a bad day? My dog got run over by a car. I had a fight with my wife last night, so I'm feeling down. I got fired yesterday. Is that depression? What is depression? How do we define that?
Depression is diagnosed on the basis of certain symptoms. So the person has to have either low mood or apathy and a couple of other factors, loss of functioning. It can't be attributable to substance use. And you could put in there it can't be attributable to a situation that may have triggered it, for instance, bereavement, someone dies. But the reality is that sometimes when people do have a circumstance that gives them the same kind of response that a depressed person would have, they have the low mood, they have the apathy, they have the loss of functioning, sometimes there is a combination of the situation and actual depression that has set in because of that situation. So there isn't often a really clear line between what you might call situational depression and actual depression.
So what is the difference then? I mean, if I'm hearing you right, so I'm into substance abuse and I end up with depression-like symptoms. Is that not counted as depression?
That's not counted, and that's not depression because there's a clear medical explanation for your depression. You have a hangover,
right.
Or you're withdrawing.
I shouldn't laugh about that. I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, let me be clear. Just now that I've said that on the air, especially if my children are listening, I wasn't always a Christian, but 25 years ago, I walked away from all of that thanks to the power that God offers through Christ. But,
Amen.
So we're not talking about people who do it to themselves in a way or chemically alter their own minds.
Right. No, but sometimes a circumstance, getting fired from a job or financial disaster, or a divorce or a death of a loved one can begin the process of someone developing depression. What we find is that often the way people think about those negative events in life will determine whether it's, moves too far into the future or not. So if a person goes through a divorce, for instance, and they think, I'll never love again, I'm unlovable, no one will ever love me.
Right.
And that's how they process the emotional impact of that very, very distressing situation. They're going to end up carrying that sad feeling much farther into the future than someone who thinks, that was really hard and I'm really down and out right now, but I'm going to heal from this and I'm going to learn from it and I'm going to love again because I can love. God made us all lovable and capable of loving others. So those are two totally different ways of looking at that life event, and they determine pretty much how the person's going to feel about it long term. And so that will determine the likelihood that it will turn into major depressive disorder or not.
Before we talk about what actually causes major depressive disorder, let me ask this, because we live in a world where a lot of Christians think that, I think Dale Carnegie might have done this to us at the beginning of the 20th century. We're always supposed to be upbeat, but it's perfectly normal for Christians if they went through a divorce or they went through a death or they went through the loss of employment. We're not talking major depressive disorder because you're discouraged the next day necessarily, but that's okay for Christians too. Those are normal human responses, aren't they?
And this is part of the problem, is that because we haven't made room for people to have the normal gamut of negative emotions that even the man of sorrows told us we could have by being our example and having such sorrow in his life, we don't allow for that in the lives of Christians. What we end up with is called secondary disturbance, where we're disturbed and then we're disturbed about being disturbed. Oh, I'm feeling really sad, but I shouldn't be sad because I'm a Christian, and therefore I'm even sadder about being sad than the original sadness itself.
Yeah, I think that's
you know what I'm saying?
That's been an outcome of the prosperity gospel, and we're not real fans of the prosperity gospel on this program because it's not really an honest assessment of the human condition, or it's not an honest assessment of the promises of God in this lifetime either. And so people feel guilty when they feel bad, or they feel negative, and they sit in church and they say, well, I'm not normal. You are.
And paradoxically, that makes it more difficult for them to resolve those negative feelings.
Yeah. So they don't ever deal with it. They just shut it down because, hey, we've got to put on a smile and be a positive, upbeat Christian.
Yeah. On the Abide website, we're starting a blog and we're calling it Ending Pretending.
Oh, that's awesome.
Isn't that great? And the first step in resolving any of these issues is actually admitting, hey, I'm struggling with depression.
Right.
I made the observation early in my Christian experience that people went to church to get religion and they went elsewhere to get help. It shouldn't be that way.
No, that's unfortunate. I hear the music playing. That means we're up against a break. My guest today on Disclosure, Jennifer Jill Schwarzer. We're talking about major depressive disorder. And when we come back from this break, what we're going to explore is what actually causes depression. We've seen already that maybe negative life events can trigger depression, but that doesn't necessarily equal depression. We'll be right back after this break.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
And we are back from the break. I hope you took a few moments to go do a few stretches and sort of get your circulation moving so that your brain is operating optimally. And now get comfortable again because we are back on the air. My guest today, Jennifer Jill Schwerzer from Abide Counseling. Jennifer, Abide has moved. You are now in the sunny state of Florida, right?
Orlando, Florida, yeah.
Orlando,
right.
Florida. I have dreams of maybe retiring in that neck of the woods one day.
Seriously?
Well, it's too hot, though. You know, Orlando...
It's very hot.
You know, I'm a Canadian.
And it's flat.
Yeah, and it's flat. So no mountains and no cold. I like
No
my
mountains.
cold. I need 60 degrees as the ideal temperature. When I go outside in the morning, I always go for a walk first thing. You know, I like to watch the sun come up as I'm walking. And if it's 55, I'm happy as a clam. I don't know why we say happy as a clam. Are clams happy? You guys, are clams happy? Do we know that?
I haven't diagnosed them as having that issue.
That's an unfounded claim that clams are happy. Pigs in mud.
It's a clam claim.
Yeah, it's a clam claim. But 55 it puts me in a good mood, those cold temperatures.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, well, then don't come to Orlando.
No, I know.
Sorely disappointed.
Well, I was thinking more I'd like to get to the coast, and because in the mornings there it's always like 65. And then I can stand in the water when I'm too hot.
And you don't go in the water inland because it's full of gators and snakes.
Yeah, I know. I can think of a few people I'd like to invite to swim in the lake, but is that wrong?
Don't try it.
Oh no, I'm getting frowns. I'm getting
wrong.
frowns from the control room. Jesus wouldn't do that. No, I know. I'm striving to be like Jesus. I'm not there yet. Hey, we're talking about...
Clearly.
No. Here's the good news. Every day's a little bit better. You know, people who know me, since I became a Christian years ago, say, you're still kind of rotten. And I say, I know, but by the grace of God, I'm less rotten today than I was yesterday. Yeah, and tomorrow will be a little less rotten yet. I'm going in the right direction. And that's what Christianity is. Christianity is not perfection. It's heading in the right direction. That's what it is. And,
that even rhymes. That's really good.
Did that rhyme?
Sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, direction of perfection. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Greek word for perfection, teleos,
maturity.
Is it's being in the right on the right path. To the ancient mind, if you're going the right path, like if I'm on the right road going to work, that's perfection. That's the road that'll get me there. Perfection isn't arriving at work; it's the whole process of getting there. And that really actually applies to the whole dilemma that we were talking about, how Christians can actually have mental health problems. Like some of these issues don't leave easily. So just because you've had a religious conversion doesn't mean that all your interpersonal and emotional and cognitive problems are going to disappear overnight. Oh, no. I mean, read the book of Psalms. Some of it, if you didn't read it in the context of the whole Bible, you'd give up. There are real pleas for help. What do we know about what causes depression? We mentioned before the break, in the last segment, that depression is not feeling down about a negative life circumstance. It's not the hangover you got from going to the bar Saturday night. That's not depression. Right. What causes depression? How does it happen? What do we know?
Well, one of the features of it is low brain serotonin, low circulating serotonin, and that's why a lot of the medications for depression increase the amount of circulating serotonin, which is the mood stabilizing neurotransmitter. And it increases the amount of it circulating by, it's called serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So you don't reabsorb as much serotonin, so you have more circulating. And so low serotonin is pretty much part and parcel to depression. But there are other chemicals involved. I don't want to get too technical.
Well, no, we can get a little bit technical. We've got a smart audience. I think we've got a smart audience.
Oh, all right. Well, women are more likely to develop depression than men. They overall have less serotonin in their brains than men. And this is interesting to me, too, that people before, like the 18 to 34 age range is the most vulnerable.
Really?
And as people get over 60, they get less commonly depressed. And I think that's interesting. And I really have a theory about that. I'm not positive it's true. But I think, you've been through so much by the time you're 60, and you've lost so much. You've had friends die by that time. You've had health problems. You don't look as good as you used to look. And you just sort of get over being bummed out about misfortune. And you're just like, well, I might as well just choose to be happy. So that's where the choice comes in, where you know that if you want to get depressed about everything that goes wrong, you're going to have more and more stuff to get depressed about. And you sort of make a life choice to start walking on the bright side of the road.
Well, I'm not.
And that's a skill that we have to learn.
I'm not there yet. I am. I'm almost.
You're not 60 yet?
No, I'm not 60 yet. But Jean teases me because she's noticed that they've moved the age limit for an AARP card down a little bit, and I'm just about to qualify. And every time those ads come on TV, first of all of the TV stars from my childhood are doing AARP commercials now or timeshare stuff.
Okay.
But I have noticed, I'm coming up on the half-century mark. That's the rough age group that I'm in.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that I don't freak out about stuff like I did when I was 20.
Listen,
yeah.
Let me share something with you. I just read about this study of German angst, is what they call it, the tendency on the part of some German people to be extremely negative. It's like
I'm 25% German? Oh, yeah. My grandmother's from Essen, Germany, yeah.
So you know what I'm talking about. So they went through and they were going to try to figure out the antecedents of this German angst. So they develop a hypothesis, and they say, well, maybe it's the cities in Germany that were the most devastated by World War II that, sort of created the seedbed for this German angst. So they went to the cities that had been the most bombed out, and they found the exact opposite, that the most positive and optimistic people were in those cities.
Oh, really?
Isn't that something?
Well, they went through, pardon my French, but they literally went through hell. And they made it.
And they made it through. So there are certain coping mechanisms we learn that sort of, I hate to say, but like almost survival of the fittest. If you're going to make it past a disastrous situation, you're going to have certain optimism to get you through that. And so that's my theory, is that when things get really tough, it kind of forces us to stop feeling sorry for ourselves and start making proactive choices. So to be as positive as we can be.
Once you've stood in your cratered out house, the dent in your new car doesn't seem so bad.
Exactly.
I'm not laughing at that misery, but I'm the first generation born after the war. My father spent his childhood in World War II, and I think there is some anxiety that comes with that, especially when they were immigrants as well and came over with nothing. So you're always worried, is there going to be enough for next month and that kind of thing. But big things didn't seem to. They've been invaded by the Nazis. Their parents were in the camps. Suddenly, small problems seem small. And so I guess I'm resonating with what you're saying about getting into your 60s and you don't sweat the small stuff anymore. It's kind of like after having your first child, it's like, oh my goodness, is this baby going to break? And by the time the second, third, fourth, and fifth children come around, it's like, where's the child? I don't know. We put them in the backyard. They'll be fine. Yeah.
You learn to relax in the midst of disaster.
Right. So serotonin, it's a serotonin issue plus a lot of other issues. Yeah. I did notice you said that women are more prone. So men are actually better at one thing. We're better at circulating serotonin. I am better than my wife at something.
You can take pride in that.
Yeah. I'm a serotonin circulator.
We'll let you feel good about that. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, but that's
we'll give you that.
Causes depression. What does depression look like then? So what are some indications that maybe your serotonin levels are low or some of the other chemical processes are deficient? How do you know?
You're going to have extreme low mood or a complete flat affect with lack of motivation. Like nothing that used to be exciting and pleasurable to you seems exciting and pleasurable anymore. And you're going to be in that sense of low mood, and that apathy is going to reduce your ability to function in work, in relationships. Oftentimes people will eat too much or too little. They'll sleep too much or too little. Another feature is psychomotor agitation, or moving very slowly. It'll just sort of throw the nervous system
unpack
off.
Psychomotor agitation. Slowly was the opposite of that, right?
Yes, right. So people either move very slowly or they seem agitated.
Okay.
And they move very fast. So those are both the potential signs of depression. They're not conclusive signs, because that can mean a lot of other things.
Oh, no, I'm always in a mode of agitation. I tend to move quickly and do things fast. And when I'm really busy, small offsets get irritating. I'm not sure that's depression, though. I'm one of those highly wired Germanic types, I think.
Yeah, you got the German angst.
Even though my house has never been cratered.
You didn't get bombed out enough.
No. I still freak out about a leaking pipe because I never went through that. So apathy, low energy. Apathy, I think, is a good word. Stuff that you used to find pleasurable, relationships, going out for dinner, None of it matters anymore. So you're watching your friend go through this. Let's pick on a friend, and they appear to be depressed. They appear to be apathetic. They're down. They don't want to do anything. Let me ask you this question. How useful is it for me to say to my friend, why don't you just snap out of it? Can't you just choose to be happy?
If you want to lose that friendship, that would be an excellent way to approach the situation. But I would say that before you do anything, empathy. Always empathy first.
Okay.
Always listening first. Always trying to understand before you advise, before you judge, before you label, even before you try to help. Just try to be with that person in that space. Because if you don't take the time to do that, then you have no right to weigh in on their situation.
Well, I think a lot of Christian people struggle with what you just described because we seem to dish out a lot of advice. I've tried to tell people, unless you're asked for advice, don't ever give it. Because on the receiving end, it's pointless, isn't it?
And what you'll do is you'll drive that person further into isolation because they'll feel reprimanded by what you're saying, or they'll feel belittled by what you're saying, or discounted or invalidated somehow, and they'll just resolve never to speak to you about it again. So we have to be very careful how we approach these things with people.
What other kinds of things aren't useful? Just telling people to snap out of it. I think a lot of people mean well. They offer the advice. But don't you think they're sometimes just heaping, I think you've mentioned this just a moment ago, but heaping more guilt on people?
That's right. I think there's a few things we could do wrong. One would be kind of rushing to judgment about it or diagnosing the person. Oh, it's your kid's leaving home. Is that what's bothering you? Instead of letting them tell you what's going on, you're kind of projecting it onto them, and that can shut a person down. Another one is oversimplifying or being reductionist about it. I remember an experience I had when I was wrestling with depression, and I was looking for answers, and I was, going to various people and asking questions, trying to figure out what was going on and how to get help. And I remember someone I highly respected saying that depression is simply self-pity. That's all it is. And
wow.
I was definitely not going to raise my hand and say, well, I'm depressed, because I would be basically saying that I'm just living my life feeling sorry for myself. So those kind of sort of judgmental labels that we put on it do not help. So those are some things we can avoid. I remember a turning point for me was looking at Dr. Nedley's book, and he had such a matter-of-fact, problem-solving kind of approach. He wrote a book called Depression: The Way Out. He's a medical doctor, but he's taken a strong interest in depression, and he has a depression program that he runs to help people with it. And I remember looking at the very matter-of-fact, very problem-solving, kind of straightforward way he addressed the depression issue and thinking, wait a minute, I don't have a moral failure on my hands. I'm not unspiritual. I don't have some fatal flaw in my character. I have a problem that I need to solve. And so I started being very much more proactive about it, and was able to make some headway.
Fantastic. Hey, listen, we're up against another break, Jennifer. My guest today, Jennifer Jill Schwerzer, and she's from Abide Counseling, recently relocated to sunny Orlando, Florida. We're talking about depression, and at the moment we're discussing what you don't say to somebody who appears to be struggling from depression, apathy. They've checked out of life. We're going to take a quick break, and right after that break, we'll be back with Jennifer Jill Schwerzer. Creation, evolution. Where did the world come from? Where did you come from? Were you created in an instant? Did you evolve from another animal or life species? These are issues that are discussed in classrooms, textbooks, and sometimes around your break table at work, when the conversation suddenly turns serious. These kinds of questions are answered in our free Discover Bible Guides. These 26 beautifully illustrated guides cover all the major themes of the Bible, and they answer some of the hardest questions of life. You can get your free copy just for the asking by contacting me. Go to VOP.com and click on the tab that says Study. That's VOP.com, the tab that says Study, or phone me, 888-456-7933. That's 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides, available just for the asking. And we are in the back half of today's broadcast of Disclosure. If this was I guess a football game, we would have just finished the halftime show. But instead of a halftime show, we had an incredible offer from the people at the Voice of Prophecy. My name is Sean Boonstra. If you're just tuning in, my guest today, Jennifer Jill Schwerzer from Abide Counseling in Orlando, Florida. We're talking about depression. And did you just hear my voice crack a little bit, Jennifer? Did you hear that?
Were you sad about something?
No. My voice has been cracking forever. I sound like Mr. Haney. They
You're
make fun of me.
backing up through puberty again.
Can you do that?
That happens when you turn 50.
You go the other way?
Yeah.
I don't want to go through puberty again. Those were awful years. I don't want the zits. I just don't want the zits. Hey,
sorry, brother.
Hey, listen, we're talking about depression, and we were talking a little bit about what not to say, like
yes.
Don't rush to judgment, and I think you were going to say something about.
Here's a couple more. Here's
go
a couple more. One is don't over-pathologize. Let me give you an example. I had a client who was told his whole life that he had bipolar. He would go into bed, and he would stay in bed for 6 months at a time and do nothing.
Wow.
And he was told by his family, you can't help yourself. There's nothing you can do. This is your disease. And he finally he came to the Lord, and he was involved with a religious ministry, but he wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. And he was my client. And so he called me one morning and said, I just can't get out of bed. And I said, you can't or you won't.
Wow.
You can't or you won't, or you don't feel like getting out of bed. And he thought about it, and he realized, well, I don't feel like it means I can't, because I've always been told that when I don't feel like it, that I can't, and that being motivated means feeling like doing something. And I said, that's not true. You can choose against your feelings. In fact, you need to get out of bed and just rediscover the power of your free will. And I really talked to him about that, and he discovered the power of the will and started getting out of bed. And it was exhilarating for him to realize that he didn't have to feel trapped by his illness.
Well, I think that's huge just on every front. We live in a world now where everything's baked into your DNA, we're being told, and you can't help it. You can't help it if you feel like this, and you can't help it if you behave like that, and that's just not true. It's just not true.
Because behavioral science says it's either nature or nurture, but they don't generally include choice. And who we are is a combination of those three things, nature, nurture, and our choices, because our ongoing choices reinforce the nature and the nurture inheritances. And so we can make choices going into the future. There's this whole field called epigenetics where people can activate their genetic tendencies or deactivate them through choices.
Right.
So it's really quite exciting. Yeah.
So does your behavior change your brain, or does your brain change your behavior? The answer is yes.
It's both. That's right. So another kind of ditch we can fall into is over spiritualizing. When someone becomes depressed, we tend to conflate the psyche with spirituality, and really they can be distinguished. There's a lot of interconnections between the two, but someone can be a very deeply spiritual person, very committed to God, and still struggle with depression. And we need to realize that and treat the person appropriately. It does not help to avoid the problem. Sometimes when someone's struggling, we figure, well, I just won't talk to them because I don't want to make them feel embarrassed. It's better to be, really open. I can remember going through issues and someone from church coming up to me and just tearing up and saying, I'm really concerned about you. And I can't tell you what that meant to me, just to know that they really cared. We may not know how to help the person or quite what to say, but we can go and tell them that. I don't know what to say to you. I don't know quite how to help you, but I want you to know I really care, and I will help you in any way I can. If that's all you can say to that person, then that can often mean the world to them.
Well, you know what I've noticed, and I don't deal in your field, but I've done a lot of funerals, and nobody remembers what I said when I came by the house right after Dad died. They don't remember what I said. What they remember is that I showed up. That's
right. It's not what you say. You can bungle your way through it, but if you care about that person, that's going to come through somehow. It's not about being, and that's why people won't say anything, because they want to say the quote-unquote right thing. If you don't know what to say and you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, just tell the person you really care about them and you want to help them in whatever way you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, why is it? I guess you've kind of defined why a lot of people aren't going to talk about it, why they're so hesitant to ask for help or admit that they're dealing with depression.
It's the stigma, especially in a church context. We need to normalize mental health problems. We talk a lot in the church about physical health these days, and we need to re-include mental health in our health message. We have over-compartmentalized mental from spiritual, like mental is over here, spiritual here. They're connected. They impact one another. And we need to, recognize that people can struggle with their mental health, and that's okay. And we need to create an environment in church where people can actually talk about these things and find solutions. And as far as I'm concerned, I would like to see more of those solutions somehow attached to the church itself, whether it's to have a counseling office, or whether it's to have, books written by Christian authors, so that people don't feel like they go to church to get religion and they go elsewhere to get help because church doesn't know how to help them. We need to start addressing these things effectively.
Well, we treat it differently, don't we, though? Mental health we treat differently than if I showed up, I've been in a car accident and my leg got amputated, and I show up in church, there's lots of sympathy, there's lots of empathy, and a lot of people saying, oh, that's too bad. You got hit by a car. It's unfortunate this happened. But a depressed person is doing something wrong, I think, in a lot of people's opinions. You must be doing something wrong.
The thing is that the brain is a physical organ. Just like the arm or the leg or the heart, people can be born with diabetes. And we accept that reality that people can be born with anomalies to their physiology that cause disease. The same thing is true of the brain. People can have even genetically inherited brain disease where it becomes impossible for them to control their moods the way that a normal person would control their mood. And we need to give a wide berth of compassion to people, because the reality is, even if it isn't DNA genetically inherited, it can be environmentally inherited. Maybe they grew up in a home where they saw fighting all the time, or there was alcohol abuse, or maybe they themselves have a past of addiction and that permanently compromised their brain structure and chemistry. There can be a slew of factors that make people who they are. And some of us, the reality is some of us struggle harder than others, and it's the ones that have an easier time that tend to look down on the ones that have a harder time. And so the ones that have an easier time, and talking to you now, guys,
right.
Thank God you had an easier time. That means you need to help pull people onto the boat rather than smashing their knuckles as they try to climb onto the boat.
Well, what a powerful analogy. I think we do that a lot.
Yeah.
In mental illness, I've even heard in some Christian circles, well, that's just demon possession, or it's demon this or demon that. And demon possession is real. If you've ever seen the real thing, you know that is not what depression is or anxiety or what mental illness is. I've seen the real thing, and you can't mistake it.
But the thing is that there can be some overlap, and here's where it gets kind of dicey, is that your shield against all forms of negative supernatural influence is your forebrain.
Sure.
And the reality is that some of these many, if not most of these mental illnesses do impact the forebrain. But that does not mean that people with mental illness struggles need to be abandoned because they're demon-possessed. That means we need to surround them all the more. I had a lady contact me. Every time I go to church, she said, I start hearing the voices. I'm fine until I go to church. Well, I recognize it very quickly as a demonic attack. And I said, get 5 or 6 brothers or sisters to surround you and pray over you and then walk with you over that threshold of that church. We need to be willing to do that kind of warfare for the weak among us,
Right.
And so there is some overlap. It's not that there's two entirely distinct categories, but we need to be careful not to rush to judgment, as we talked about before, and
agree.
Assume that someone has psychotic symptoms that they're demon-possessed.
No, I agree. Although I have discovered, as you're mentioning that, the people that have delved into the occult often wrestle with mental health later.
That's right.
So, hey, but let's talk about depression again for a minute. Let's say that let's say you just described me. I can't get out of bed in the morning. I don't care about anything. My family doesn't excite me. My career doesn't excite me. I just don't care anymore. What's the path out? You've mentioned choice, but if I were to show up, I finally got the courage, or my wife drove me over to your office. What's the path out? How do I get started?
So the treatment that shows up in the research as being effective is both chemically treating the brain with antidepressants and seeing a counselor. Very few will recommend the drugs alone, and most will recommend that you try to look at with counseling. If you can't get through it with counseling, then you use the drugs as a last resort, because obviously drugs have side effects and they're expensive, and they can cause secondary problems. So what I do with my clients is I take sort of a 3-track approach. Number one, I try to help them improve their brain chemistry. In most cases, that means lifestyle improvements. That means sometimes I'll encourage them to look into different supplements and herbs I can't prescribe those things, but I can let them know that some of these things have helped other people and encourage them to look into it and ask their physician if it would be okay to try some of these things. Most of them don't have side effects, but definitely lifestyle like exercise, things that are well established to help people improve their brain chemistry. Exercise, regular hours, limited media use. Another one, it's a big factor, is limiting.
Unpack that for me a little bit, because guilty as charged. I take my laptop to bed.
Do you?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
I do.
And you go on Twitter.
No, well, yeah, I do go on Twitter. You can find,
You watch
but I'm
it.
not the only one on Twitter, Jennifer. I know you're there too. I know you're there. But I was in bed working till about 10:30 last night. My laptop in the bed, and I've set it so that the blue light turns off. But it's still a bad habit,
Good.
isn't it?
I know it's bad. That is very bad, Sean. Do not follow Sean's example in this. Try to cut down on screen time, particularly 2 hours before you go to sleep. And if you can't, detach from your computer, you can do one of two things. You can get Flux, which is a software that'll take the blue light out of your screen, or you can get these amber-colored glasses that you put on like 1 to 2 hours before bedtime, and that'll help you start producing melatonin so that normal people would normally get sleepy, but I know you don't really sleep, John.
Then I could look like John Lennon in bed, too. I'd have the yellow little round glasses on. And
like Bono,
Oh, no, I didn't like Bono or Lennon, either one of them. But, I mean, Jesus loves them, and I love them in the Lord.
Bono's a Christian. He has some really good things to say.
All right.
He is.
But media use, and is there a form of escapism there, though? Is that in other ways?
Definitely, especially highly stimulating media. So, like, Twitter is one thing, but it's another thing to be watching, like action movies and stuff all the time, and anything that rattles your nervous system. Think about it this way. You've got a nervous system. If you're constantly jangling your nervous system through media, through caffeine, through your lifestyle, then you're going to have nervous system issues. You just have to treat your nervous system well.
No.
So be careful how stimulating the media is. If you're going to consume stimulating media, try to make it earlier in the day so it doesn't disrupt your sleep. But I would say if you're dealing with anxiety and depression, really limit your highly stimulating or even emotionally draining type media, even real emo. Like a lot of times the women that come to me that have depression will be watching a lot of like romance movies and this type of thing, or reading a lot of romance novels, and they end up in a headspace where they have these unrealistic expectations of life. And then they end up contrasting that with their life, and it's like so depressing, So a lot of times
it's not just the models that are being photoshopped; the life's being photoshopped. The life you see in a movie isn't real.
It's not real at all. So anyway, trying to improve brain chemistry is very, very important. Another factor is caffeine. People with anxiety and depression should cut down or eliminate caffeine, and that's just science.
Well, it's amazing. Caffeine's the most socially acceptable drug in the world, and yet we forget it is a drug and it is psychoactive. You do pay a price for it. So I hear them playing the music, and so that means that I have to take another break. And I think you're going to find this break important. Grab a pen and paper, because we have some amazing resources at the Voice of Prophecy. Maybe you've never really delved into the Bible, but you'd like to understand it for yourself. We've got the possibility available to you. So grab pen and paper, pay attention to this announcement, and I'll be right back with Jennifer Jill Schwerzer.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions? Like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Does my life really matter to God? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers that you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter the most to you. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
It is hard to believe, but we are in segment number 4 of today's episode of Disclosure. My guest, Jennifer Jill Schwarzer from Abide Counseling in Orlando, Florida. We're talking about depression. And Jennifer, just before the break, we were beginning to unpack, the approach you take with someone who is suffering from, major depressive disorder. And you use sort of a 3-tiered approach to tackle depression, don't you?
Right. So I want to first improve the brain chemistry, or do what I can with their lifestyle to improve brain chemistry. And sometimes people's brains are sufficiently in need that they need to go on a medication to try to increase their serotonin levels. So I'm not totally opposed to that, but I like to try less impactful methods first if possible. And then the second aspect is I try to help them improve their thought life, because oftentimes people have very distorted styles of thinking. And this is where cognitive behavioral therapy is very useful to treat depression. It has been shown, hands down, just to be one of the best treatments for anxiety and depression, because people tend to, their emotions tend to track with their thoughts. And so the way that they think, the way that they view life, their attitude tends to create a groundswell of emotion that tends to track with that. So we work on their basic thought life and try to get them to see life in a more, in just a brighter, more balanced way. And that can be very, very helpful. And then thirdly, try to get them to connect to God. Because, God's standing by to help anybody who will come to him. And I am a Christian counselor. I'm a licensed counselor, and so I've studied the secular science of psychology. I know a thing or two about that, but I also know that we're powerless apart from God, ultimately. And so those methods may be helpful, but if you want to get to the root of the problem and really for the person to experience true transformation, connecting them to God is very, very powerful to that end.
You mentioned God, and this is a faith-based show. I'm a Christian as well.
Yeah.
Does the Bible acknowledge depression? Because a lot of people are using it like a positive thinking handbook these days, but is it in there?
Sure, of course, not in those words, but I did a very interesting study recently about Jesus coming into the garden, and it says in the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, that he became sorrowful and very heavy. And I looked into the original languages there, and I found that the words that were used were exambio and adamanio. Exambio means basically terrified is what it means. And adamanio means depressed, but there's like 3 Greek words that are translated depressed or sorrowful, and this is the strongest of the 3. So what you have is Jesus coming into the garden feeling anxiety and depression, and guess what the 2 most common mental health disorders are? Anxiety and depression.
Oh, wow.
So we can see him coming into the garden bearing, as Isaiah 53 says, our infirmities, literally carrying our mental illnesses and carrying them all the way to the cross.
Now that's interesting, because Hebrews says that, we can trust Jesus. He was tempted in all points like we are, yet without sin. He didn't resolve his problems by sin. He was sinless. But the indication is that he went through everything that he went through: loneliness, he went through rejection, he was mocked by family members. And he took our entire experience on him. And I'm just, as you're describing this.
And he went through anxiety and depression. It's right there. Look, if you look at a pie chart of the psychotropic medications that are prescribed for different disorders, you're going to have a little skinny sliver the size of a way too small piece of pizza, right?
Right.
That's going to be for psychotic disorders. And the whole rest of the pie is going to be anxiety and depression.
Wow.
So I'm saying that day after day in all of these counseling offices, the 2 presenting problems that are right up front there are various forms and combinations of anxiety and depression. And when Jesus came into the garden, he started to carry our mental illness, our anxiety and depression. He knows what you feel like, depressed person. He knows what it's like to have that burning in his chest and that sense of foreboding and that lack of motivation, and to be completely blown off course by these intense emotions. He knows those feelings, and he carried them for you. So to me, that's just powerful.
Well, do you know what I'm hearing?
People's healing.
Do you know what I'm hearing in there too?
Yeah.
I think everybody's prone to anxiety. My wife will tell you that I am especially prone to it. I get anxious about a lot of things because I just tend to be a high-wired person who worries about everything. I tend not to make mistakes because I thought about everything a year in advance. And I, obsess about it. But when it comes to my human condition, when I hear you say that, it's like, I can let go of this a little bit. Jesus worried about my condition for me. He understands who I am, why I'm broken, how I'm broken, and he even took the anxiety from me. I don't have to live that way because he took that for me.
So I would suggest another three-pronged approach to this. Number one, know that Jesus carried this already. You have a sympathizing Savior. Number two, know that he does want to relieve your suffering. So the goal is not to stay in the depression forever. The goal is to experience change and transformation and ultimately healing. But number three, he does want to use this in the meantime as a growth experience for you. And so there's this paradox, and this is very, very common in counseling, where we see this paradox where we want people to accept their situation and not fight against it, or not just keep wishing that it was different, but then at the same time we want them to be fully committed to changing their situation. And that's a paradox because those two things kind of rub against each other. But God wants us to embrace both of those things, that he does want to relieve our suffering, but he also wants us to accept it as a normal part of life and accept it because he accepted it himself, and then grow from it and become more compassionate and more empathic to other people that are suffering as a result of our own suffering.
You know what I've noticed, and I don't know if there's a couple of things I want to touch on before we get out of time. We're running out of time. One of those is the suicide question.
Yeah, but this is really important.
One observation I've got, just really quickly, is that it seems to me that some of the people who struggle the most with anxiety and depression end up becoming some of the most creative people I've ever seen. And I don't know why that is, but they become entertainers or artists or musicians. Yeah. And I don't know if that's a product of working through their anxiety or what that is.
And you can see the suffering as a gift for that reason, and I've found it over and over again that often those episodes of depression or anxiety become seedbed for creative projects. But then some of those very great artists, but some of my most creative moments have been, in the midst of that kind of experience.
Out of pain. I think Van Gogh paints beautiful pictures, and you find out later he was dealing with serious mental illness.
Seriously. Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about that for a minute. The suicide.
Experience. We want you to grow from these episodes, and we want you to kind of use the negative emotions as grist for the mill of creativity, but we also want you to live through it, and that's where the suicide question comes in.
Some of these artists end up, we think they're happy, they're entertainers, they're comedians, and then they kill themselves.
They off themselves, yeah. We want people to live. So I have developed a protocol that's very easy to remember.
Okay.
That we can use with anyone we suspect to be suicidal, because we want to prevent suicide, and each and every person has the responsibility to do that if it's within their power. So I use this acronym TIP MAP. Think in terms of tipping the person's map of their life in a better direction.
Okay.
TIP MAP. So the first question you ask is, have you ever had any thoughts of hurting yourself? If you can't bring yourself to say suicide, and by the way, let me preface this by saying that actually asking people if they're suicidal, it does not make them more suicidal. That's a common myth. It's not true.
Amen.
So you start out with, have you ever had any thoughts of suicide? If they say yes to that, then you go to the next question. Do you intend to hurt yourself? And if it's yes to that, then you go to the next question. Do you have a plan? And if it's yes to that, you go to the next. Do you have a method? Then access to the method, and then you ask about prior history. The more yeses you get after the thought question, the more trouble you're in, and I suggest you get appropriate help. You can ask the person to go to a mental health crisis center. If they're not willing to do that, you can call 911, and they will come do what they call a welfare visit and talk to that person and then help direct them to the right help that they need. But I suggest that you go ahead and ask that series of questions. Most people will just say, yes, I've thought about it, but no, I have no intention, and you can drop it at that point, because if they don't intend, then there's no reason to overtreat them.
I would have to think that a large segment of the population had that thoughts crossed their mind at some point, but they didn't intend to do it.
So honest disclosure, Sean.
Yeah.
Has that ever happened to you?
Thought about it?
Yeah.
I'd probably have to say yes. I mean, that kind of a thought doesn't cross my mind. The thought would probably be for me more, wouldn't it be better off if I was just dead? But I didn't think about actually doing the act. I just thought, I'd be better off dead. That thought, I think, has crossed my mind. I'll be honest.
Yeah. Most of us have those thoughts at some point or another.
Yeah, I'd have to say so. So, thoughts of hurting yourself, tip map. Do you intend to hurt yourself? Do you have a plan to do this? Do you have a method of doing it? Do you have access to the method? I was writing it down. And the last P?
Good. Prior history.
Right, prior history.
Prior history.
So, tried it once, more likely to try it again?
That's right. Absolutely. Okay. Women make more suicidal gestures. They're more likely to attempt suicide. Men are more likely to complete suicide. And from what I understand, women are 3 times more likely to attempt, men are 3 times more likely to succeed, because men tend to use stronger methods. They tend to use guns and things that really work. And women tend to swallow pills, and they often don't work because they rush them to the hospital and they get their stomach pumped and they live through it.
I don't think I would ever apologize for calling 911 either. You know, Jean had somebody contact her on social media years ago saying, I'm going to kill myself. My husband's out. I'm doing it tonight. And they were from another town. My wife didn't know them. And said, you know what? And she called the police in that town. They went by the house, and then the woman was furious. Why'd you call the police? And my wife said, because if you're going to hurt yourself, I take it seriously. So
it's a crime.
No, if she was bluffing for attention, she'll never do that again. Yeah. But if she wasn't bluffing, someone got there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I had one client. She sent me an email intending, and I couldn't get in touch with her, and I knew she was at work, and I called the police, and they met her in the park. She finally contacted me, and I said, they're coming. She was furious. They talked to her. She calmed down. She was furious, but every time I see her today, she tells me I saved her life. Yeah. Every time I see her.
I think I will always err on that side. And if you're playing games, don't play games. But if you're real, I'm going to get you the help you need.
And 911 are trained. The people are trained to deal with these things, so they're not going to look at you like you have 2 heads and tell you, why are you calling me? They know that that's the go-to place, and they will go and they will do what's called a welfare visit and chat with the person, and a lot of times be able to de-escalate the situation.
Jennifer, we're at the 2-minute mark. 2 things. How can somebody find Abide Counseling? And then I'm going to ask you another question.
www.abidecounseling.com.
Abidecounseling.com. That's where I found you.
Yep.
Yeah. So the other question is, somebody recognized themselves in today's show. They heard it as I was, I gave that very depressing opening. But as we were discussing that, they're hearing themselves. What's their next step? What should they be doing?
Contact Abide Counseling, and we'll try to. We do mostly distance, telephone, Skype type counseling. We call it coaching because some states don't allow counseling across state lines, so we have to be careful. We can't take high-risk situations, but we can at least get the person started, and then we can help them find the appropriate help in the local area if that's what's necessary. But they can go ahead and contact us, and we can try to help them. We also have a free telephone support group. We have a couple of groups. It meets twice a week. It's absolutely free, and it goes through a couple of books that I've written on mental health topics, and they're great groups and a great way to supplement any kind of counseling program. So we offer that for free. And we also are starting a blog, like I said, called Ending Pretending. And I recommend that people get some self-help books. They can start with my book, 13 Weeks to Peace. I have another one about relationships called 13 Weeks to Love. But yeah, reach out to Abide Counseling. We'll get you started.
AbideCounseling.com. My guest today has been Jennifer Jill Schwarzer. I hear the music. That means we're out of time, Jennifer. But what I appreciate about your approach is it's honest, it's transparent, and it ties people back to the real answer, God. And I know, folks, that there is hope out there. If you're struggling, don't struggle anymore. Contact Abide Counseling, abidecounseling.com. Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the show this week. My name is Sean Boonstra. You've been listening to Disclosure. Until we meet again on this station at the same time next week, God bless.